I was victim of something what I now call show up and throw up. I'm like, here's everything we got, take it. I mean, another way to look at it is like a Chinese restaurant menu. You got 90 things on a menu.
Yeah.
No one's going to say, I want this. They have to be sort of taught. It's like, here's the best things on the menu for you. Here's what you need. Looking back at all the businesses I worked for, they all had a different vision of what good looked like. Yeah. Whether it's sales numbers and targets or how you go to market or marketing, whatever it may be, like really defining that with a set of principles that people can follow.
In today's episode, we speak to Luke Trayfoot, a real payments expert who is currently with Mangopay, previously with PayPal, but we also learn about how he used his gap year to manage Formula One drivers and to do charity work in Kenya. You've done a sociology degree and a law master's, and then you're like, and I was also managing Formula One teams drivers, and now I'm cold calling people.
Yeah.
Was there ever a time when you were like, actually, have I made the right decision?
I knew that there was a...
Really excited to do this because we're mates. I've known you in a work capacity for a while, but there's a lot I don't know. And I believe that great people in our industry stories should be told because A, they should be the celebrities rather than the Love Island people. Shoot me for that. But I believe that what you've achieved is so rare that the story deserves to be told.
Thank you.
Not at all.
Thank you. I'm very happy to share sort of layers and details. We can get into it and share it to the world.
Let's not go too deep.
Yeah.
So, not what I expected, because I should imagine what you're doing today, not the podcast, but in general, isn't what you expected. So let's go back all the way to secondary school.
Yeah.
Where did you go to school? What was your focus at school? Can be extracurricular, doesn't matter. And what did you think you wanted to be at that time?
So I went to Epsom College.
Okay.
Fairly local to me, but boarded. So that was a funny sort of...
So your parents shipped you off?
Pretty much, yeah. 15 minutes away down the road, but don't come home on the weekdays, and Saturdays you can come home and have some mates around. So, no, great school, really good time, great friendships, still got a lot of good friendships to this day. Yeah, big thing for me at that school was like the blend, right? So for me, I wasn't necessarily a bookworm. I mean, I was sporty and sort of played a lot of sports and very into what they gave as a school, right? Yeah. But I also needed some rigor and some structure, right? Yeah. And I've sort of learned that through the years, that maybe with the sales sort of hat on as well. Yeah. By boarding at that school, sort of having that time you have to get up at the same time every day. You know, your shit has to be together, right? Yeah. And I think from that really built some robust sort of mechanics for me to sort of build life upon.
Do you know, Anna was saying to me the other day, my other half, she was saying, why do you wake up every day and go out and get coffee? And I realised it's because when I was at school, the breakfast hall was 20 minutes away, like a 20-minute walk across the school.
Yeah, right.
So it's just a habit that was ingrained in me from there.
Right, getting up, getting out, and sort of doing your thing. And so, that as well as... I think, when you go to the position of what do you want to do, like I found the strangest thing was always, you look at exams and then you look at sort of university and so on. I had no idea, right? I really had no idea what I wanted to do. Yeah, some of my friends at early stages, lawyers, doctors, that makes sense, right? You have to go through that sort of process and then go to the right university, but actually for me, it was kind of, I'll feel it out, right? I knew I wasn't ever going to make it in professional sports, unlike my brother who, got a decent career in rugby until he had to retire at 27, and now he
played for Harlequins, right?
Yeah. So he played for Quins, and then he went to London Irish. Yeah, so he had 2 years there, and then retired, and now he's happily married in Brisbane, Gold Coast of Oz. So he's living the dream down there. But
was there a pressure because he sort of knew exactly what he was doing and you didn't? Did you feel a pressure in that?
I wouldn't say of pressure because he was a younger brother, right? Yeah. I think when you have an older sibling, maybe you're looking up, right? Yeah. But sort of, I think for me it was more, he found his kind of calling, if you will, right? He had a talent and he had an application. I hadn't found it yet, but I had a big belief that I knew something would turn. And we'll get into that a bit later, sort of, again, how I ended up here, but or where I'm at. But, I think more so in the case of guiding him. So I had a sort of impact where he was at the same school as well. Yeah. And being sort of 4 or 5 years older, I was sort of helping him through his stages, right? And so going up to what was Castleford at the time, where the England 16s, 18s, and 20s used to train, going over to the likes of France and supporting him, and there's a sense of responsibility as an older brother to do that. Obviously, my parents were involved, but no, it was great. I mean, it was great to watch him sort of come through as well. What was funny was, I would go and play rugby, and everyone would assume that I'd be shit hot. So I get chucked in at sort of second row, sixth. I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I kind of knew rugby, right? But they expected a lot. So that was one of the big things when I got to university, which was trying to go to the rugby team, and then I realised probably not
maybe not. The name's carrying a bit of weight,
socially and on the sports field, right?
So you. When you left school, you didn't know what you wanted to do, but you still went to uni and you picked a subject.
Yeah, so actually I took a year out on that purposefully to know, I wasn't really a bookworm. I wasn't really sort of looking at education as a path to getting a sort of a core certificate and moving to something, right? And so I did 6 months at a city brokerage. So, it's Cantor Fitzgerald, but it's now sort of rolled into, I think, ICAP and these big businesses. And
So 1 minute you're in Epsom and you're in this beautiful school, and then all of a sudden you're not.
Yeah.
And you don't have that rigor that you said you had at school.
Yeah.
And you're in this environment where you're essentially just running around helping people that you probably don't respect that much, but maybe admire a little bit. Mm-hmm. Fair to say.
Yeah. I mean, they were young, successful guys, right? So there's always that element to it.
But surely there was a lost feeling. For me, if I think about when I finished rugby in New Zealand, I came back and I was in that exact. I was a bit like, ugh. Where am I going and what am I doing?
It's interesting you say that, because I felt a massive sort of appreciation for. I've always had a work ethic. Mm-hmm. My old man left school at 14. Yeah. He's nearly 80 now. Yeah. Set up a scaffolding company. Yeah. A real grafter, and so I sort of grew up around that. And by going to sort of what is one of the top schools and sort of having all of that kind of catered for you to some extent, I actually had a first to the other side. Yeah. Really sort of being self-independent and doing that. And so that 6 months was a great learning curve. In fact, they a lot of the time they're saying, don't dump off university, stay here, be a broker. And that was an opportunity. But I also wanted to travel and do some stuff as well. So
you did 6 months and then decided to go travelling before making a decision on uni?
No, so I had Nottingham lined up. So I went to Nottingham University. I had that lined up at this stage. Obviously, there's an opportunity to not start, right? I mean, you could have thought things differently, yeah. So, did a bunch of time in Africa, which was awesome. So did some time in Uganda and Kenya.
What were you doing? Just knocking about, or did you have stuff to do?
No. Did 12. Yeah, right. Yeah, 18-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
Did 12 weeks. Kenya, Uganda, but it was organised, right? So it was an organised trip.
Fine.
Did some time in the south. Did some time in the north. A lot of it was kind of mixed in with charity work, but I mean, it was a great laugh at the same time, right?
You've got a gap year for the ages. So you spend, it is a gap year, I suppose. It's a year between school and... So you're like, right, I'm going to go to a brokerage and I'm going to change cash for all these guys that are doing well in Europe, and then I'm going to put tickets in, and then I'm going to do charity work in Africa. Yeah. Mate, that's amazing.
I think I had to pay back for all the sort of vices that I saw in my 6 months pre-2008 as well.
Everyone's riding high.
Yeah, I mean, it was nowhere near what you'd see in the lights of Wolf of Wall Street. But you could see where the elements of that story, that sort of screenwriting came from. But,
do you think when you did that, you had a set idea of, okay, this is the sort of road that I want to travel, and then going to Africa changed it? Because there's a perspective that comes with that, right?
I've never really considered that. But I think, being always lived in London my whole life, grew up in London. As I said, sort of my dad was always in town in the city. The city of London is always an attractive thing, right? I mean, you look at that and you think there's opportunity.
It's aspirational.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So I think that side of it, I think it definitely changed me in a way of thinking, right, that was the path to university after those experiences. It wasn't a gap year where I sort of gallivanted, did a round the world trip and just sort of
put beads around your ankle.
Yeah, and I wanted to be very sort of purposeful about that. At the time,
which is commendable for an 18-year-old.
Yeah,
by the way,
I think that's one of the things. We'll get into this a bit more detail, I'm sure, but being sort of an older head on young shoulders, I commonly see that trend when I see sort of 30, mid-30s, even nowadays. I mean, you're getting younger and younger founders, right, going in and being able to articulate things that are probably 10, 20 years, ahead of their time. so I kind of had that. I think there was a point in that where, I understood it was purposeful and there was something to gain from it.
Yeah.
But
So then you go to Nottingham.
Yeah.
What did you study? Bear in mind you didn't know what you wanted to do.
I had no idea what I wanted to do. But what I did know is that I wanted to go to good university.
Yeah.
Mostly because of the people.
Fine.
Back to the point, if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor, I truly believe you have to go to the best university for that, and the people kind of come second if you want to go in. But for me, it was very much a case of like looking at what's the right environment for me to go, and I could do whatever course that my grades permitted me to do. And so I studied sociology.
What is sociology? That sounds like a really weird question, but I'm not actually sure.
Yeah, right. So like, on a macro sense, right?
Yeah.
It's studying the sort of the social norms, the social beings, sort of how does society evolve? So there's all sorts of areas around it, right? I mean, geographical sociology, urban sociology. Yeah. So and you look at theories around capitalism, communism, and socialism, and so on, and the theory of sort of work and time. So there was a lot in there that was quite interesting.
You get to uni, you study sociology, you meet great people.
My wife.
Did you meet at uni?
Yeah. We met at university. Yeah.
Oh,
So we've been together a very long time, right?
Well, like 3 years. You're what, 25?
Yes, I mean it was one of those things, right? I mean we've been together since. I think what really helped us is that I was living sort of on the suburbs of London. She was living on the suburbs of London. We were very close, so we can kind of keep the relationship going between outside of term time, and never looked back since. And we've got a 8-month-old daughter at home. I know you've had a recent arrival as well, so two girl dads sitting right here. But
two girl dads.
But no, it's great.
Oh, mad! I didn't realise you met her there. Yeah. So okay, so you leave school, you then work in a brokerage, then go to Africa to do charity work. Then you go do sociology, easy for you to say, at Nottingham University, where you meet the person that ends up being your future wife and the mother of your child. But I bet at that point you still didn't know what you wanted to do.
Totally.
Okay, so how did you work it out?
So we mentioned my brother a bit earlier, right?
Yep.
And I was, again, fascinated with sports, and I like the commercial side of sports, at least from the outside, right? I mean, once you get on the inside, it's not quite Jerry Maguire. Of course, but most things. But so in fact, after university, I was kind of looking around, what do I want to do? And I had a couple of friends of mine who were working in the commercial side of sport with both football and motorsport. Yeah. So sort of started to work with them on a few ideas and starting a few different things. And on the side of that, I did a law master's. So I studied contract law.
Casually did a law master's, sure.
Yeah. So I thought to myself, there's been a lot that I've done which has been great education-wise, but actually getting into the concrete detail of knowing what's in a contract, right? I mean, obviously a law master's is not where you get the right to go and practice law, but it gives you a very, very good foundation for business, right? Being able to read a contract and understand that.
So it doesn't make you a lawyer. It just means that you have studied law to the extent to which you can then use that information for your own.
That's how I saw it. I mean, there was a bunch of people on the course who, were practicing law, but they wanted to get an advancement in, it was entertainment law with contracts, right? So with that mind of entertainment law, which includes sport, but also music and film and so on and so forth, that was an angle for me to go, okay, well, if I do that at the same time as, starting something with some friends, that was an entry point for me into the working world, if you will, right?
So it's an entrepreneurial start.
Yeah. And
so what happened?
So we had a great sort of year or two.
Yeah. And what did the business do? What was the...
So there was two arms to it. So there was player management, or in case of motorsport drivers. And then there was the commercial side, which was sponsorship.
Fine.
Mostly sponsorship, a little bit of PR as well. Yeah. In fact, both those guys now have gone into that world of motorsport. One's very successful at McLaren, running all their partnerships.
Oh wow.
The other is now in kind of esports and running an esports team, right? So they've kind of gone down that track and seen them do fantastically well, which was awesome. So we did a year or two. At that time, there was a F1 team called Marussia, which was backed by a wealthy sort of Russian oligarch. He wanted to set up a supercar brand. And so the way to build your supercar brand, have an F1 car and show everyone sort of what you can do. So we were helping young drivers bring them through onto the academy process for them, plus some PR, plus some commercial sponsorship. So
the journey gets even weird. I'm not going to repeat it every
know,
time, but all of a sudden you're doing PR and driver management for a Russian oligarch's fledgling F1 team.
Yeah, right. Back of the grid. No one wants to be the back of the grid, but at least you're
on the
there
grid
somewhere, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And then meanwhile, my brother was looking for representation in rugby, and he'd sort of got his pro contract and was looking around, and so I represented him for majority of his career at the same time. So we were doing that for a few years, and then it's funny because I very much work on calendar years and my mindset of jobs and moving on and so on, and
where does that come from?
It must be down to structure, right? I mean, I like to work in that cadence of sort of a reset. Christmas time is always a good time to sort of ponder and think what are you going to do for the year ahead, and are you in the right spot? And I remember at the time thinking I need to get stuck into something that's probably a little bit more, I don't know, like because that world was very purposeful, but I was very young, right? I was sort of 21, 22, trying to be an entrepreneur. With a bunch of friends, it just didn't feel like work, right? And actually what's funny now is that there's a thirst for that in a lot of people who go through that process. But, I felt like I needed something a little bit more structured. You get to a point where you think, right, it would be great to get be on a payroll and, have a big firm that you can go and learn from. So I remember that Christmas, I was looking around for opportunities, and I saw this business that was hiring for, junior salespeople.
Oh, so you really went for the I'm just going to start at the bottom and go into
yeah, absolutely. I had sort of no ego to think, well, I've done the sports things for a couple of years and thought actually, getting stuck into something, I've still got the opportunity to do it now. Yeah. And so there was great business called World First. In fact, I think one of your other podcast guests, Jeff, was at that business. We didn't cross over at the time. I'd sort of left before he came in, but great business, international payments, and that was kind of my foray into Fintech at the time. I mean, this is pre-TransferWise, pre-Revolut, pre what you see today to move money, right? This was very much, a business that was trying to displace the banks and sort of bring the cost down. And
so what's this, 2005?
No, it's 12? Yeah, it's 2012,
okay.
2011, 2012, something like that.
But you've done a sociology degree and a law master's, and then you're like, and I was also managing a Formula One team's drivers, and now I'm cold calling people. Yeah. Was there ever a time when you were like, actually, have I made the right decision?
Hell yeah.
Don't take too long to think about the answer, mate.
When's lunch? When's the end of the day, right? I mean, there were points where you have huge lows in that type of role, right? And I have huge admiration for people in the businesses I work for, right? Yeah. Where we have sales development reps, right? And look, those days are not really there anymore. I'm sure there's some businesses doing it, but you have to be, true belief now that you have to be socially aware of selling. You have to be video sort of friendly for selling. Yep. It's not just hitting the horn and hope for the best. Like, you get some results, but there are way better ways nowadays with technology and everything else. But, I still have a huge admiration for people who just basically get told to stuff it, every other
because of how it made you feel?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And the difference from what you were doing before as well.
Totally, right? So there's that sort of juxtaposition of the two things, right? One is you're in your own comfort zone, you're running your own business, it's a bit softer, right? All the way to the other side of the spectrum, near enough, right? At a young age, and you're quite impressionable, but I had great leaders around me, people who would, 35, 40-year-old guys who would be on cold calling with you, right? Yeah. And so that showed me a lot about that culture and that way of leading from the front, right?
Yeah, nice. But the thing, so you've gone from like carrot, where it's your own thing, and you're like, there's something I can aim for, to stick, right? Because that's how you're managed. Yeah. So you see, you're at the bottom of the payments world, looking up. Did you have any idea where it was going to go, or was it just hit this day's KPIs, this month's numbers?
So I knew that there was a burgeoning industry that technology was going to help sort of bring up, right? Yep. And everyone, I mean, the banks and sort of the big card schemes and so on are, were growing phenomenally well. New technology was coming out. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the time, we set up a product. In fact, the business set up a product which was working with Amazon, right? Which was the sort of start of marketplaces and cross-border selling for e-com, right? Yep. So the online e-commerce journey, and you couple that with payments, it was a really sort of powerful mix for a selling environment, right? And so we had this ability to go and give these sellers from around the world receiving accounts, because Amazon couldn't go and pay money to the US or China from Europe.
Yeah.
But, massive business like that couldn't really figure it out. They just said, hey, we just want to pay euros to a euro bank account. It doesn't matter if the seller's in China, you guys look after the rest of it for us.
Yeah.
So that was kind of very special to be in a business that was at the frontier of doing that. And then
did you feel as though, sorry to interrupt you, but do you feel as though when that happened, you're making calls, right? And you're selling something, and then this new thing comes in.
Yeah.
Did it... Personally, I feel as though that would have filled me with energy.
Totally.
The floor must have been buzzing, because everyone's saying yes, because you're pushing on open doors, because there's a need for it.
Yeah.
Was it a buzz?
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. There's this sort of, in all great sort of growing businesses, there's this magic sort of moment, right, where product fit is there, the market has a need, there's margin in what you can do, and the customer feels like they're winning. So it was really, really special. And I mean, interestingly, at the time, the business had two arms to the business, two arms to sort of what it was selling. One was your traditional retail FX, whether it was to mid-market or corporates, and to individuals, someone buying their house abroad or so on. And then this e-commerce side, right? And the e-commerce side was quite small, quite relaxed, nice team. And then that's now, I mean, that business now, it got bought by Ant Financial, Alipay. Yeah. And, that is the primary thing that this whole business was eventually built on 10 years later and sold for, which was,
epic.
This, right? So I was right at the start when people would have to fax their account opening, their documents over to get KYC. I mean, that's where it came from, and so that kind of humbles you in some way, because you're riding a wave. Yeah. But I think in my mind, I always knew, like, these waves. How long is that wave, right? Yeah. So then, where do you pick your sort of exits and pick 100%. Your entries, right? And one of the things I saw with that was that these big platforms we were working with didn't want to always give the control or the power of the customer relationship to another payment
What sort
business.
of platforms? What examples?
Amazon as an example.
Fine.
But there was plenty of others that
like
we worked with.
Marketplace platforms.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Walmart then got into the game.
Fine.
These guys sort of going into they were trying to get all these sellers to push the supply onto these platforms for the consumers, right?
Yeah. So sellers, just to be clear, is a person selling something on the internet.
Yeah.
Fine.
Absolutely. So typically, we were going after platforms that had corporate, business sellers, right? Fine. So they were, and sometimes they were big brands. I mean, Adidas, Dyson, these guys were going, well, we've got direct to consumer, then we've, obviously the bricks and mortar stuff was sort of slowly, as the high street came down, they were thinking, well, what avenues do we have to sell online? And this was sort of a nice avenue. The marketplaces love it because they're not having to necessarily always buy things and then try and sell them and warehouse them. And so it was sort of drop shipping as well.
Do you know that a business I was in got acquired by Zalando because it was Anatwine that was technology to provide exactly that connectivity.
Yeah, it was the listing sort of algorithms and and all the SKUs. And so all of this was burgeoning at the time. And but one of the biggest pushbacks we had was these platforms and marketplaces were saying, well, I don't want to have to pass you all my sellers, then you get to own them and then you can do what you want with them. You can go push them onto my biggest competitor. And there was a business which was founded in Vancouver, Canada, and was really the sort of big next step for me, which is a company called Hyperwallet. Yep. And what they did slightly differently is they went to the platform and said, we won't own the sellers. You can have an API, you can create those, but you own all the data. You just trigger us a sort of request to go and pay these businesses and people.
So you're sat in world first, love in life, because people are answering your calls and they love what you do. When things are going well, it's hard to leave. Right. So how did that come about? Because you didn't plan to be in payments. So now we're into your actual payments journey.
Right.
How did it come about? Because every business needs people who can sell stuff. So you're always in a job if you can sell. Yeah. Simple as that. Yeah. But how did you go from getting in at 7 to call Sweden to Hyperwallet saying come over here?
So in fact, at the time, the business wasn't in Europe. So it was looking to enter into Europe. It just sort of raised some capital. And obviously with an idea that in future years they would sell the business, knowing that they needed a global footprint. And because I was so focused on these platforms and marketplaces, and at the time there really weren't many people who had sales, payments, cross-border payments, and the experience of selling to these types of customers, the opportunity kind of arose to me. And as I got into it more, I was really like, wow, the technology's really strong. it's more enterprise, which is where I always wanted to get into, enterprise selling, and yeah, it was a hard decision, right?
This is the first time you've been headhunted.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
must have been awesome.
Yeah, I think at points that feeling of someone wanting your skill set is a really sort of great feeling, right? And then there's the other side of that, which is, can I actually do this job? When you do it for the first time,
you step up. It's hard to step up.
What am I walking into, right? Albeit when you're younger, you can definitely afford to make a lot more mistakes. But yeah, there was that element of it.
So and what age at this point?
So thinking back, it must have been 24, 25. I think at the time it was, again, US titles in Europe was always quite interesting.
Yeah, always bigger.
Because it was big business development director.
Wow. So director, but you were a director at 24, 25.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
But I think in the States they have a slight difference to it. So it's not sort of managing director or one of these titles. But at the time you're looking at first boots on the ground, you're looking at sort of how can you sell into market.
So you've got this director title, and you've been set this task.
Yeah.
I can imagine the thought was, like, stick to what I know and cold call people. Or were you emailing people? Like, how did you go about booking all those meetings? Because it's a fresh challenge in a new company.
Again, it's that time. How much, looking back, how much that sort of sales mentality has changed, right? And then you're going into enterprise as well, right? And so there was definitely the element of getting on the phone and so on, but it was more sophisticated in the sense of it was very much my first foray into like solution type selling.
Yep.
It was enterprise, it was understanding, and you had to really get to learn payments. This is where I learned payments, right? We had some great stuff happening at World First, but it was quite sort of transactional in the sense of open an account, receive money, get paid money. That's it. We were now getting into, Hyperwallet was really a business based on global payouts where you had to go and understand what was that business doing at the time and how could you change it, how heavy an integration it is, what's the cost benefit for the customer. Like, it got really deep. And so you can open doors, but what I found in that business, that role, and sort of going through that journey was you could have the best chat, right? But that will open the door. You could never close at that level just by sort of having good chat, right?
How often did you come unstuck with that? Because you wouldn't have realised that at the start, and you'd have thought, I can steam through this, and you build your pipeline, you think this is going to close, this is going to close, but you'll realise down the track that you're not going to close.
Quite very often at the start.
Okay, cool.
Because we had lots of different things and ways to integrate and things to sell.
Yeah.
And so, I was victim of something what I now call show up and throw up.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, here's everything we got, take it, right?
Yeah.
Or pick what you want. I mean, another way to look at it is like a Chinese restaurant menu. Yeah, you got 90 things on a menu. Yeah. No one's going to say, I want this, 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 this. They have to be sort of taught about what that is going to do for their business.
Yeah, you uncover what they want.
You want to serve up a tasting menu, right? It's like, here's the best things on the menu for you. You're a vegetarian, or you don't eat these things, or you don't like these flavors. Here's what you need, right?
And I love that Chinese menu analogy.
Yeah.
And I think too many people do that. They go in and they go, we're really proud of, and at Detected, we've been like guilty of that. We've said, look at all these great things we do, but actually it's only this bit, and it's just a case of taking the time.
Look, I don't think anyone's innocent of that, right? I mean, it's quite often that modus operandi of just show them everything and hope it sticks, right? And it's very normal. I don't think anyone should shy away from it. But the better you can get at kind of really understanding what is it that they want to achieve, what is it, how do they operate, right? What's the resource, like those sorts of things really helped. And so that was an amazing learning curve, plus the underlying sort of architecture of how payments worked in that business. This is going back again sort of 10-ish years, right? Where we had 50 different banking partners around the world in order to be able to settle money. You couldn't just work with one bank and then hope the money gets there, right? I mean, people today still do that. Payment businesses still do that, right? Because it's hard to get that global footprint. And so you had to know all the local routing codes, you had to know the local pricing. Every bank had a different price and a different currency. And so it was complex, right? But we made it so that it was complex enough that there was value in it, but it was simple enough for someone to buy. And that was where I think payments has got this sweet spot. If you get that mix right, where someone knows you've gone deep, you've got that sort of level of sophistication but also complexity, but you've simplified it for them to buy, whether that's the APIs, whether that's pricing, whether that's the upside of using it. that's the magic spot. I mean, Stripe's a really good example of that, right? I mean,
don't worry about it. We'll do it.
Dominated, just like got into the developer community, made it easy to integrate, and off you go. And also, we were selling at a pretty premium price, right? We weren't sort of low balling the pricing to kind of win market share. So when you couple that, you have to be really good at what you do to sell something at higher price than competitors. So did you feel a big not imposter syndrome, but did you feel as though there was a delta because you've flown over for the Christmas party? Yeah.
And you're like, come on, I'm flying internationally on business. I remember being 25. You think this?
Right.
So you go over and you're like, I'm at the Christmas party. I'm the guy in the UK. I've done marketplaces. I'm at World First. Like, we're flying, and now I'm here with you. And then you go back and you set up the office and you do 3 meetings in 5 cities, and then you're like, crap.
Yeah.
I need to actually really work out how this thing happens. Was there a big gap when that moment happened?
You know what? For me, there wasn't a gap. It was more in the sort of stages of it happening.
Yeah.
But I was super aware of it. I remember coming into the office the day after Christmas party. Peter's pulled me in. So, right, good to meet you.
That's it done. Nicety's done.
Do you think you know more about payments than me? I think was the first question.
Oh, beautiful.
And so it was just like, okay, well, now I know sort of where I'm at, right? And so it was very apparent you had to learn all of this stuff very quickly, and payouts actually is it's a bit of a I mean, it's very complex, right? The banking community and sort of global banking community, there's no one global bank, can't send money everywhere. That will change, and it has been changing, but the understanding of what that all meant was really big to me, whereas before it was very much sales of we take this, we send this. Don't worry about the rest, right? This was actually enterprise stuff. So, big sort of anchor point in my payments journey came from that. And growing the business. And I remember at the time they were sort of moving into. I mean, they ended up winning the likes of Verbo, which was home away at the time, Ticketmaster, Google, big businesses, right? Doing sort of decent MRR, 6-figure MRR.
So MRR's monthly recurring revenue. So how much money that account makes Hyperwallet per month?
Yeah, exactly.
Epic.
Yeah.
So now you're 26.
Yeah.
And you're doing these big deals. Did you, like, you talk about your calendar year where you're thinking at the end of the year, like, did it get to a point where you were like, okay, well, now I'm the man, so I'm going to see who else wants me? Did that ever occur to you?
No, not in that place.
Oh, so you're really in there?
Okay. I felt very, very strong sense of community.
Amazing.
I thought we had a really solid product. Yeah. It did what it said, which is a sort of big thing in payments.
Yeah.
Does it actually do what it says?
Yeah.
And we had a a great couple of years ride on it until and then I'll say until, but PayPal bought the business, right?
Epic. Honestly, when I hear of anybody getting a big result, it actually just fills me with joy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I want people to do well. It's amazing.
Absolutely, right.
So how involved were you in the acquisition?
So not much, like from a sort of arm's distance, if you will.
Yeah,
I mean,
nice.
a lot of that was happening West Coast states and sort of meeting with potential suitors of the business. But I was running the European business at the time.
So from when you joined to that point, how long was that?
That was 2.5, 3 years, I think.
So you go from cold calling at World First to I'm at your Christmas party at my new company, and then 2.5 years later you're running the European business.
Yeah,
boy.
Yeah, and it was great. we had a lot of like amazing things that happened in that journey, and finding different things about the European market versus where product was in North America winning things.
There's that nonsense as well, where American companies think Europe's one town.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so but also the way American businesses and again we've got to put our mindset back 10 years, right? It's like they wanted APIs, but they kind of wanted an interface and a portal and manual. They're happy to do manual because culturally they're very used to going into a bank asking or getting paid by a check, and so but in Europe the banks were already off to the races with APIs, and so we were selling technology kind of at the forefront of JavaScript widgets so that could have a smart form. So when you have you're in Thailand, right, you need to put in different local bank details than if you're in Europe or if you're in another market. So we were doing some really great stuff with that, and again a lot of that role, that's where it started to become less. I mean, I was still selling, right, but it was more, how do you take things from that coal face, bring it up to the business, work with the CTO, the CPO,
nice.
Work with those teams to say, here's what I'm finding, here are my bets, this is what I think we need to do. And then if you couple that with the appetite for the senior leadership of that business to come to Europe, to get into the meetings, to understand it and see it in front of them from those customers, that these are the things you need to have if we want to work together. it was like this magic sort of moment where they were building for that, and then to couple that to get acquired by, at the time it was second or third biggest payments business in the world, probably outside of MasterCard and Visa. They needed a global footprint, right? So sort of the 2.5 years we did in Europe, and big shout out to Simon Banks as well, who was MD for APAC. He built the APAC business as well at the same time sort of we were building Europe, and so that gave us a fairly global footprint, right? Major markets, which made us an attractive proposition.
Is it public how much PayPal paid for Hyperwallet? How much is it?
So 400 million. Yeah.
Just the scale of all of this stuff. This is why I say that these conversations need to be had, because that is an enormous amount of money to pay for a payment. Like, it's just, and actually, if you then look at it in the grand scheme of things, it's tiny. Yeah. Because there's companies that are bought for billions. So that must have been a big realization that, like, I am Luke Trayfoot and I am now in the payments industry. Yeah,
I think this is the thing that was that point, that journey point between sort of selling something in payments, but to being in a business like PayPal, it's like, you only got to look back at their history of making acquisitions and their growth and being a huge consumer brand, right? Most of the other businesses weren't consumer brands. You're now working for what is a big merchant business. Yeah. That's how they get the consumers, but the consumers make that business, right? And so the flywheel of that, and working with all the other folks in there that have been there for various different points in time and being acquired in, and I likened it after the kind of first year when we did a lot of the integration work, right, and sort of making sure that my folks got put in the right places, and for anyone that's going through that, it's very hard when you get bought by a bigger business, but I tend to always give the advice of just like, you have to jump in with the company that's acquired you. You don't resist that. Just go in with it.
Because you're going to lose.
Exactly. You just, and actually it just means you embrace it. You can find out if it's not for you. You find something else. But I find a lot of people, in recent roles, where we've acquired businesses, they kind of resist that. They kind of want to stay in that place. And so that was a big learning curve, and then along with that, I always likened it a little bit to an F1 car, right? We had all these pieces, right? It makes sense. You had all these pieces, but kind of it was very hard to put them all together, right? And that's a known thing. I mean, it's when you're acquiring businesses, that is a very, very tough thing to do at scale and at pace.
What was your title by the end of your time at PayPal?
So I was director for...
an actual director this time.
Exactly, yeah. Like you're not a business development director. Yeah. And for platforms and marketplaces.
Okay, so what does that role actually mean?
What was fascinating when I came in, we sort of got acquired by them, is if you think about PayPal being a merchant business where, online merchants need to offer a payment method in PayPal, and then the consumers who opt to use it, and so therefore it's a closed loop system. But as the internet and online e-commerce is changing so much, they kind of didn't have a part of the organization that was set up for selling into those what are quite complex, like merchants or complex sort of platforms. And so in fact it was, I went into the business and just said, look, I think you're under-servicing this segment. It's a big segment, right? I mean, you think the Amazon, eBay business models, but there's tens of thousands in Europe, hundreds of thousands around the world. They have this issue where they have to collect money, hold money, pay out money, and KYC all their users. It's like, that's great, but we're going in doing the collection part, but we've got all the pieces to do everything else, but we're not selling it. And so people weren't targeted to kind of do that. Plus, it's complex, right? You've got a lot of regulation around money movement, especially in Europe with PSD2. So for me, that was an opportunity to come in and make a difference. And you come back to kind of, if you're a good seller in a business, you'll do well. I sort of twist that over time into being a producer. I always think if you're in any role, you can still produce for a business, right?
Absolutely. The only thing I've heard that's similar to that is to refer to yourself as an enthusiast rather than a beginner.
Right.
Right. So just think about yourself as a producer in a role. It's such a magnificent way of thinking about how you can impact a company. I love that.
Producing for a company, if you're in sales, you've got to hit your numbers, right? But you think about all the things that you might find on the ground, that product need or that compliance need or finance need to understand, right? You have to kind of do those things. And so I felt like there was a great opportunity to produce for that business and kind of help them sell more to more businesses and get that sort of flywheel going. Albeit, in a business like that, you can't turn the needle nowhere near like you can in others, but still.
So you were director of marketplaces, and your responsibility, I suppose, was to grow PayPal's penetration into marketplaces in a region. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's across EMEA.
So get as many marketplaces, just to bring it all the way back.
Yeah.
Get as many marketplaces. So that is the likes of like an Amazon, but every version of Amazon, Etsy, whatever.
Yeah.
Get as many of those companies offering PayPal as a payment option at checkout as possible.
In fact, it was even deeper than that, because the PayPal had a lot of these businesses already, but they only had the checkout button in those businesses. But it had the ability with Braintree to collect credit cards and Apple Pay.
So Braintree was another company that PayPal bought?
Yeah,
Okay.
very successful US credit card sort of processor.
Which was part of eBay at one point. Oh, it was part of eBay and PayPal, and then when PayPal went off, Braintree went with it. Is that right?
Exactly. So Braintree is now sort of a wholesome part of PayPal, as is Hyperwallet and all the other acquisitions they made, Zettel and so on.
Yeah.
But you're looking at a business like Etsy, and you're looking and saying, well, yeah, that's great. You're using PayPal in one way, right? What about being able to pay out to a PayPal account? What about global payout disbursements through Hyperwallet? What about credit card acquiring through Braintree? What about fraud? So
it's as many marketplaces using PayPal, but using everything that PayPal offers rather than just
that whole suite of services, and that was the complex issue that I mentioned before, which was no one was people were going in and selling the sort of PayPal checkout.
Yep.
But and this has changed now. I mean, the teams are far more sort of integrated with all the product sets, but at the time it was still sales teams by product set. And so Peter and I always used to laugh, because it was when we first got in there, you go to a meeting and it was like the clown car with about 20 people coming out of this tiny little Fiat 500, right? And you'd have one selling cards, one selling PayPal,
all to the same person who sat at the other side of the table, like, what is going on?
And guess what? You have a 1 hour, you have a 1 hour meeting, right?
So you turn up and throw up. You give them the full Chinese menu.
You've got no option,
because you're not taking the time to ask them the question. You're just wheeling out here.
You don't have the option. You're fighting to try and get FaceTime and sort of share a voice.
So what you were doing, really, like, you're owning a revenue number, fine, but you're not just saying, right, we're going to sell this thing to these people. You're saying, here is how we're going to sell it, and we're going to try and change the internal PayPal processes.
Yeah, like let's have a team of what we think are really great salespeople
that know all the stuff,
the whole gambit, rather than trying to bring all these people into one meeting being specialists on a product set. Let's be a specialist on a type of business or a vertical, right?
Yeah, okay.
And so that, it was great learning. And a lot of the time we were having to pull people in who were specialists, but we'd do that behind, the doors, and then we'd have, one sales rep, one solution engineer going in, selling it.
Once you know more, and you can pick it.
Yeah.
Epic. So then the PayPal time starts to come to an end, and you're then considering options?
Yeah.
By the way, a stellar career behind you already.
Yeah,
right? You're in a spot where you're like, okay, I can go almost anywhere.
I think that was where the next decision lied to me, which was lied out. Sorry, that to me it was kind of a case of, well, you've done the sort of up and coming thing in first, you've done the sort of high growth Series A, Series B type sort of 200 people business, and now you kind of done a 3-4 years at the 20,000 big guys, like, take your pick kind of thing, right? Well, and I still haven't really carved out exactly what that looked like, but for me, big thing was having focus on what I like about payments businesses is when they have a North Star.
Yep.
And I know you can say that about any business, but in payments, it's not trying to be everything to everyone, to every market, right? Because in order to be, my sort of strong feeling is, in order to be really good at payments, you have to go deep.
Yep.
You can't be layers on top of other people. You get found out eventually, right? I mean, that's okay if you want a slick API to sell to SMBs, but ultimately, the long game is you have to be deep and really good at one thing.
So from a career perspective, and I remember talking to you about this at the time, about what you were doing, you've got to find the company that's got the North Star that you want, and you've got to connect that to your secret sauce and make sure that the two are beneficial to each other, and rather than cancel each other out. So the question I have now is, in your opinion, what is your secret sauce? What if you were to say, right, I'm going to write a bio for Luke Trayfoot, and you can be as brash and as confident as you like. What is the thing that makes you a unique expert in this industry, or a unique proposition, or a unique performer, or a unique individual? What is it? What is the domain expertise? What is the characteristic? What are the things that make you as unique as you are? Because you are unique, by the way.
Thank you. I think break this stuff down quite simply into people and culture. It gets thrown around as like a big buzzword, but if you deeply think about things purposefully, it's like any sport. I mean, I think quite often about sales as and sort of commercial organizations as science and sport, right? Science being the data. So if you take that to rugby or football or whatever, you have to understand how your players getting on, what are they eating, how are they training, are we being effective, what are the results looking like, have we got possession, those things. And then it's kind of the sports side of it is the competitiveness and the culture. Yeah. And so, that's number one, because that's the foundational stuff that if you go and watch, I mean, I'm big Chelsea fan, which has been
big Chelsea.
It's big. And Porto 2021 was second to having my child, I think. Maybe third with the marriage, but
don't forget that.
But I think you look at sort of, I mean, their performances over the last 18 months, right? Yeah. Plus new owner, plus all this change, plus all young. You look at that, right? That's a great case study for performance, which is you're throwing 11, or in Chelsea's case, 45,000 new people into a group and trying to get a result very quickly, right? So it takes time as well, right? You need time, but without that foundational sort of people culture element, you then can't build what is, I believe, the next piece, which is knowing what good looks like.
Yeah.
So, I look back at all the businesses I worked for, they all had a different vision of what good looked like. Yeah. Whether it's sales numbers and targets or how you go to market or marketing, whatever it may be, like really defining that with a set of principles that people can follow. Yeah. Because you look at sort of the way that, again, maybe coming a bit back to the sociology days, right? And looking at sort of how people interact, you need a healthy level of conversation that people, there's no, super hierarchies or, you need that nice wide sort of basis for people 100%. To be able to compete and be open and be accountable, right? But own it, right? And so I'm a big believer in that. Like you can't really have a successful commercial organization with any hiding places. But also then when you hire people, being super open and transparent about this is what we expect, right? And it's not for everyone.
So the way that I look at that, right?
Yeah.
Phenomenal career in sales. But when asked about what the thing that makes you unique is, you talk about the role that a COO does.
Right.
Which is really different. What you're saying is the structure and the way that we review things and how we connect that to the journey that we want to go on being defined. Yeah. That is, you're saying that you build all those building blocks with the aim of hitting the commercial objectives that you're set, but that sounds like more of an operational role.
I think that's where sales is. I'm probably on that element of sort of. I got asked a great question the other day actually, which was on the side of data and sort of feeling or sort of culture. Where do you sit sort of on that barometer, right? And I still think I'm sort of this side of leadership, right, which is the side of your culture and belief, right? Because you can't just do everything from data, right? And it's a shame with Chelsea, you can have all the best players in the world with the best AI data, but it doesn't work, right? So, but I think it's embrace. Salespeople need to embrace this stuff around knowledge, right? Knowledge is power and all that stuff. And so, you don't want salespeople having to do operational stuff, right? That's why leaders are in. That's why sort of, and so I tend to try and take on as much of that burden as possible. It's their responsibility to be productive, to make those decisions, to have autonomy to go and pull things together, right, and make it happen. So that's kind of an expectation, right? And so if I look at sort of any poor sales organization, I mean, it's typically results wise, right? I mean, you can have a great culture but low performance. The high performance stuff is always knowing how you stood, right, and understanding. Being a big golfer myself, right? I look at things and I go, well, how can I improve my swing? How can I sort of, what are the mechanics on that? What's the feedback? If I hit a ball and it goes right, why is it going right? Don't just hit the next one and hope it goes straight. And that's kind of sales as well. And I think applying that knowledge and just empowering people to go and think that way, it doesn't work for everyone. But I feel like that's always something I'll bring. Always.
I like it. It's refreshing because a lot of people just say just the numbers, but there's a feel. Like if you think about the times when you've been most happy in what you're doing, it's where you're not overthinking it. That flow state that people talk about. I think about times when I talk about detected. Yeah. And if I plan, average. Yeah. But if I bump into someone on the street and they ask me, that's when I'm at my absolute best. Yeah. And you've got to allow for feeling in business, regardless 100%. Of what anyone says. So it's nice to hear that that's your thinking. So you're at PayPal, happy days, 20,000
Yeah.
person org, big title, and then you decide you're going to move to a new company. So talk to me about Mangopay, the size of the business, the proposition. Let's have a look at that.
Great business. I mean, in the space, seen it sort of for quite a few years. It was previously owned by sort of French bank, and private equity company came in and acquired that business back 2 years ago, and good size, right? 200 people. Had good growth rates both on revenue and volume. Pan-European, and so
what did it do?
So it's focused on selling payments, so pay in. What is a wallet system, so to hold money and payouts, as well as offering sort of user identity, fraud, and KYC for platforms and marketplaces.
Nice. So it's an extension of the PayPal work.
Correct. Yeah, but in this case, it was very well sort of plumbed together. So there was connectivity between all of those different pieces. So and big customer of theirs is a customer called Vinted, which I think a lot of users know because it's a consumer app and so on. And so if you ever use Vinted, you're typically taking money from your card or whatever payment method. You're holding that in a wallet. If you sell something, you'll get paid to that wallet. You can respend it and you can pay it out. And a whole host of other big customers. If you like your watches, they work with Chrono24 and and so these businesses needed someone to come and do that for them. And sort of the big task. There's three major tasks. I mean, one was increasing sales performance, but the sales results and the coverage and the people with the investment that they had. The second part, as sort of being in the UK, was being owned by a French bank. They didn't have UK licenses, and they had under the French bank they had no appetite after Brexit. But they had a temporary permission regime which needed to be officialised, which we did in about sort of 12 months, 11 months. So that got granted sort of earlier last year. And then the third part was a lot of it was sort of quite deep into pricing and methodologies and sales performance, if you will, right?
That suits you. So remember I said about what's the thing that makes Luke Trayfoot. You've literally, and good for you, because with success comes the option to decide, right? And you've obviously looked at what they needed. Remember I said it before. What's the North Star? What's the thing that makes me unique? How can I marry those two things together? So that's great. Yeah,
and so on when you look at a business like that, great size. I mean, the business is now getting on to 500 people. It's got sort of plus 60% growth year on year. Signed some really big customers. So it's going on a really, really great journey. And it's fascinating to work with what's the CEO and founder. He founded the business, right?
Amazing.
Still at this stage through that. Also under private equity, that sort of changes that sort of investment dynamic quite a bit. So lots of learning from that. So lots of, you look at things with, payments is very hard to find any sort of perfect company, right? Payments is hard. It's really complex, really hard. And so you just got to find that people culture. You've got to go and find sort of something that's on a precipice of doing something great, right? And so,
and then put your stamp on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of stamps, I'm going to ask you for a prediction.
Yeah.
It's a broad question, right? Where's the industry going? What are the hot topics? And I've got my own views, but what does payments look like in 5 years' time? It's a really broad piece, so take whatever you want from it. But what are the big things that are going to change? Pick as many as you like.
Sure. I tend to think of things like what's going wrong in the space right now.
Yeah, let's fix that.
Where's the pain, right?
Yeah, okay.
Because most businesses are online now. Most people need to take payments or they need to send payments, So there's a whole broad spectrum, right? I think there's a lot going wrong around the speed of money movement. There's still a whole bunch of sort of what is fairly archaic money movements, right? So something that we've seen recently is open banking and what is called account-to-account payments.
Yeah. So that's a person sending to another person?
So it can be one use case, but effectively think of any bank account having to send money to any bank account. Well, that's kind of the same thing even when you use a card.
Yeah.
Because you've got money being held in a bank account or a credit card account.
Yeah.
And then it's having to get to the merchant's bank account so they can reconcile it as their revenue. So turnover. So that's kind of how do you take all those kind of complex parts between that? And I think MasterCard and Visa and Amex still huge businesses. They will always be around, and they've built great ways to sort of entice consumers and merchants to continue to utilize, and it works, right? I mean, you can go on holiday to a far-reaching place and get out your Visa or MasterCard card, it probably will get accepted, right? Exactly. So it's very hard to displace that. But if you think about, then you drill into the use cases of A2A, it's like, Seeing that's quite a lot. HMRC have just started to offer it, so you're paying your sort of tax bill, right? You can go in, you can just click pay by bank. It opens your banking app. It's then verifying you through Face ID.
I almost refuse to accept that HMRC are doing anything even close to innovative as that.
It may well be a PR spin.
Yeah.
But I mean, Amex is another example. You think they've got Amex cards, people need to pay those bills, right?
Yeah.
You go in quite often. I mean, people will see pay by bank.
Yeah.
It opens a bank account that doesn't belong to Amex, right? It could be Barclays, whatever it would be. You press it and it's just automatically sent. The great thing for the consumer is that you feel like you've sent it and it's clear, right? You're not sort of hoping that it's been received by fat fingering in a bank details.
Yeah, yeah.
But the big side of it is the merchant, right? And so what is it that the merchant needs when they're receiving money? Well, they want the money to come as quickly as possible.
Yep.
They want it to be reconciled for them.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's in their accounting system, whatever it be. So they don't have to go and employ a bunch of people to do all this manual work and hope there's no errors, right?
Interesting.
But also then there's that work of who hasn't paid.
Yeah.
So you kind of have, it helps with that operational element of payments. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for that to continue growing.
Nice.
More so on the payment side than the data side, because open banking opened up all the data.
Yeah.
And that's great, credit ratings, or you sometimes I think you've got other apps where you can pull up your bank balance and so on. I mean, great.
We're sometimes asked to pull that in as a data point, but
right. Great if you can find a business sort of logic around it, and there are a few of them. But I think the underlying payments infrastructure of people who can actually make that money movement happen seamlessly and at a lower cost, right?
Yep,
is definitely going to continue to work. The challenge with that is getting the consumer adoption.
Yeah.
So as a consumer, you got your card details saved, you got Apple Pay. It's like, I'll just use that, right? So
it's got to be convenience is the only way to do it, isn't it?
Convenience or reward. You have to you
nice,
can entice or sort of, because if you're lowering the cost as a merchant, right, you might be able to sort of entice people to push that on to, because once there's a lot of data out there that suggests once people use it, once they use it once, they build trust. They don't change, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's happened for decades, whether it's cards or PayPal and so on and so forth. So that's one really big one for me. I think another big space is this use of AI, right? But sort of it's still very early days.
Okay, so if you were going to pick one thing in payments
that
AI completely changes, what is it?
So I would call this, for lack of a better phrase, smart routing.
Okay.
So, there's been, over the last sort of 5 odd years, there's been this emergence of payment orchestrators, right?
Yep.
But really, they've been around for a long time. ACI is a really good example of a business that had all these payment methods, and you can plug into their one gateway, and then you can push money to however you want. And so, if you think about the understanding of AI and how it can read data, it can create predictability. So if you can take a user session, a consumer, and because of that, you can figure out what's their highest preference for payment method, what's their sort of typical device, right, or what device they're using, and then throw up the right.
Oh, bang! So if I'm on my phone, and I go on to Etsy, let's just say, and every time I buy something, I'm like, Apple Pay's their class. The next time I go to a different retailer at a similar price point for a similar product at a similar time on the same device,
kind of
all I'm offered is that option.
Or and you can go
maybe one of them.
Correct. Or let's say you're buying from somewhere which is different currency, right? And do you like to pay in the local currency or the cross border? Like,
that remembers that. Okay.
And then it goes one deeper than that, because if you can capture that data, then the merchant can start actually doing their least cost routing. So as a payment, so as a payment provider, you could, or as a merchant, you could have 4, 5, 6 different providers. But if you can go,
we know it's not going to be impacted that much if we choose the second one, which is way cheaper to us.
So it's the advancement of,
love it.
So that is payment orchestration, but it's advancing that to a point where it kind of, it democratizes that wider than having to go with an orchestrator. Like, I think merchants can start to build that logic in.
Love it.
And then that starts to stem into things like data sets. So how do you then transcribe that data and be able to then take that and use that for other elements
and
payments.
rewards and everything? Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Mate, I could talk to you, like, I find it fascinating that I accidentally started a business that's ended up being KYB, because it's not what I expected.
Yeah.
And we serve payments customers.
Right.
So every time I spend time with you, I'm just like, oh yeah, like this is amazing, because I learn so much. And I just love the journey you've been on. So
thank you,
mate.
dude. Thank you. And likewise, I mean, I think Detect is great business, and we've looked at a lot of things together and what you've done. And I think there's a lot of payment businesses out there, as we know, who, I mean, KYC, KYB is a big struggle, continues to be. So I think you're in a really great spot to be able to service that. So thanks for having me on today. It's been great fun.
There. Cheers, mate.
And that concludes another episode of Not What I Expected. I hope you loved that as much as I loved recording it. If you like it, let us know. If you don't, tell us how you think it could be better. Thanks and see you again.